rebel in me can touch the rebel in you, and the rebel in you can touch the rebel in me, and the rebels we be is gonna set us free, and it will bring out the rebel, bring out the rebel, bring out the rebel in me. If the lover in you can touch the lover in me, and the lover in me can touch the lover in you, and the lovers we be is gonna set us free, and it will bring out the love, bring out the love, bring out all the love in us. My love is deeper than the ocean. Our love is in need of sweet devotion. Come on, because you've got the potion to bring out the love in me, and I will bring out the love in you. Let the lover in me touch the lover in you, and the lover in you can touch the lover in me, and the lovers we be is gonna set us free, and it will bring out the love, bring out the love, bring out all the love in us. My love is deeper than the ocean. Our love is in need of sweet devotion. Come on, because you've got the potion to bring out the love in me, and I will bring out the love in you. Let the lover in me touch the lover in you, lover in you, and the lovers we be is gonna set us free, and it will bring out the love, bring out the love, bring out all the love in us. Bring out the love, I said I'm gonna bring out the love. Bring out the love, I said I'm gonna bring out the love. Bring out the love, I said I'm gonna bring out the love. Bring out the love, I said I'm gonna bring out the love. Bring out the rebel, I said I'm gonna bring out the rebel. Bring out the rebel, I said I'm gonna bring out the rebel. Bring out the rebel, I said I'm gonna bring out the rebel. Bring out the rebel, I said I'm gonna bring out the rebel. Bring out the love, bring out the love, bring out all the love in us. Many rivers to cross, but I can't seem to find my way over. Wandering and lost as I travel along, white cliffs of Dover. messed up for years, and I barely survive because of my pride. And this loneliness won't leave me alone. It's such a dread to be on your own. My woman left me and she didn't say why, but I guess I have to cry. Many rivers to cross, but just where to begin? I'm playing for time. There are times I find myself thinking of committing some dreadful crime. Yes, I've got many rivers to cross, and I can't seem to find my way over. Wandering and lost as I travel along by cliffs of Dover. Yes, I've got many rivers to cross, but I can't seem to find my way over. Wandering and lost as I travel along by cliffs of Dover. Many rivers to cross, and I can't seem to find my way over. Wandering I am lost as I travel along the white cliffs of Dover.
Two wonderful renditions of classics from Jimmy Cliff, and he did them excellently. Give him another round of applause, please. Great talent. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to invite you to the first plenary of ACHEA 2019. And we have one of our distinguished administrators in Jamaica and the region, Professor Colin Giles, who will be presenting on the topic Strategies for Financing Higher Education. And it's not fortuitous that that's the first plenary, because all of us here in this room know that the big problem in higher education is how we finance it. Professor Giles has been a successful university administrator and lecturer and a multidisciplinary scientist for over 30 years. He's been serving as Deputy President of the University of Technology and since January 2015, and had an extensive period acting as President during August 2015 to December 2016. For outstanding service to Jamaica, he was awarded the Prime Minister's Medal of Appreciation for Service to Education. Professor Giles was instrumental in the establishment of the Faculty of Science and Sport in 2009 and served as the faculty's first dean. This included establishment of the School of Natural and Applied Sciences, the School of Mathematics and Statistics, the Caribbean School of Sports Sciences, the Center for Science-Based Research, Entrepreneurship and Continuing Studies, and the Integrated Optics and Phonetics Research Lab. He has served on a number of boards and committees at the community and national levels. These include membership on the National Commission on Science and Technology, chairman of the board of Chalmont High School, chairman of the JMBB JFF UTEC Football Coaching School Curriculum Committee, and he has served as a commissioner of the Overseas Examinations Commission. Professor Giles is married and has 2 adult children. Ladies and gentlemen, please warmly welcome Professor Giles.
Thank you, Mr. Aiton. Colleagues, friends all, good morning. It is my pleasure to be here with you this morning to speak at this 18th annual conference of ACHEA. ACHEA has been a very important organization on the higher education landscape within the Caribbean region. And I just like to congratulate the leaders over the years on the great work that they have been doing. And special congratulations to the present administration for putting on this conference. And thank you so much for inviting me to share with you on strategies for financing higher education. This study that I'm presenting was jointly conducted by myself and Professor Cynthia Onifulo, a colleague of mine at the University of Technology, Jamaica. Higher education is a service industry. It is labor intensive and requires resources. Governments are under great strain to fund it, and this has been established by a number of research works that have been done. Herbst in 2007 pointed out some of the issues facing various governments as they seek to fund higher education. With respect to the fact of higher education being a labor-intensive industry, just to give you an idea, that some of the most successful universities in the world, they have what is considered to be relatively low student to faculty ratios, which means that for a certain number of students, they have quite a number of persons on staff. For example, Princeton University, which is ranked #1 in the United States, has 5 students for each faculty member. The average that was taken for some 31, for some 310 universities in the United States shows roughly 16 to 1, 16 students to 1 academic staff. And of course, we'll find among the universities that are considered Ivy League, Harvard, for example, has 7 to 1, Yale, 6 to 1, and for certain programs, even at Oxford University, they have almost a 1-to-1 ratio, almost an individualized attention. But of course, this data combines both information for undergraduate and graduate students together. But the point that is being made is that we are talking about a labor-intensive industry. And not just from the standpoint of academic staff, but you sometimes have almost matching numbers of academic as administrative staff, matching numbers of administrative as academic. Because of the importance of higher education, funding continues to be a topic for discussion among persons in both developing and developed countries. And this is partly because many higher education institutions are experiencing a number of challenges. Among these challenges, we have reduction in government funding, competitions with other institutions, reduction in the number of enrollment, high operational costs, rising cost of education, and difficulties in fee payment by students. As a result of these challenges, there are several newspaper articles on financing higher education that we have referenced here in Jamaica. For example, we have Johnson 2018 writing about on the topic Deal with Tertiary Financing Once and for All. Gilpin 2018, 80-20 tertiary education funding model not sustainable, quoting the Minister of Education in referring to one particular local institution where it was claimed that the government was spending up to 80% of the economic costs. And the minister was signaling that that has to change. We have Lewis writing in 2018 about the business of funding tertiary education, making a number of suggestions about the need for institutions to be entrepreneurial, seeking MOUs with private partners to fund operations based on services that they would provide. And in fact, we have a number of models like that. In fact, in the break, I was just discussing about the matter of certain courses that relate to the burgeoning nutraceutical industries for which certain stakeholders might wish to fund the labs that do testing for them and other things like that. Suggested also is the matter of having institutions and companies started by institutions being listed on the stock exchange. And in fact, in one of our reference articles by Henry in 2017, the late Martin Henry, speaking about financing tertiary education, he spoke about the disparities in funding allocations from government and government's proposal to shift the funding model from funding institutions to funding the students. And a number of suggestions were made in terms of possible combinations of ways in which funding can be provided. Among those are funding institutions, 2, funding students directly, so that these students can then shop around for the different institutions that they might choose to go to. Then there's another approach of scholarships based on priority areas, and we find the government of Jamaica, for example, adopting that approach more and more, where scholarships are offered to different institutions based on particular priority areas for national development. Then we have support for a loan fund with low interest mortgage type loan arrangements. But of course, there are the challenges that have to do with putting in the funding for such an initial pool. We have the Students' Loan Bureau in Jamaica, and we have Nkrumah Young in 2009 lamenting the fact that there are certain challenges with funding or providing funding for the Students' Loan Bureau. For example, the undercapitalization of the fund, the fact that there are higher fees or payback fees for students because of a moratorium that is there built into the arrangements during the years of study. So for example, when a student takes a loan in first year, they don't start paying back until the course is finished, perhaps 4 years later. But there's no moratorium on the interest. And so while no payments are being made back to the fund, you have the total amount to be paid back increasing. So by the time a student graduates, the amount of money to be paid back is very significant because you have the interest plus the principal over a certain number of years. And of course, during that period of the moratorium, there are cash flow issues because for the lending institution, because we find that having a certain amount of funds out of the system for 4 years during the period of study without any payback, then that naturally creates a problem. Usually, financial institutions would not do that, but they would have payback immediately once a loan is disbursed. But these are some of the challenges. And we have also a study by Capri in 2011 that spoke about the fact that the funding arrangements that we have, certainly in Jamaica, seem to be skewed towards those who are better able to afford it. And the data shows that the average household income for students in higher education institutions is higher than the average household income nationally, which means that those who are better able to afford it are the ones who are actually in the higher education institutions. And not only that, but even in terms of the Students' Loan Bureau and those who are accessing students' loan, it is found that the average household income for those who are taking students' loans is actually higher than the average for the general population. So even the matter of accessing students' loans is something that seems to be skewed to those who can better afford it. And so there's a challenge to the overall interest or the overall objective of trying to fund higher education in a way that caters to the entire population. But of course, we recognize that, as the data shows, economies are going more and more in a knowledge-based way of operating. We are living in what is considered the information age, and information is becoming more and more the driver of production and economic development. And hence, despite the challenges in funding higher education, it has to be seen, higher education has to be seen as one of the primary ways for moving the economy of a country forward. And therefore, there has to be significant investment in higher education. It is noted that worldwide there's a trend towards decreasing government support for higher education and to shift the costs progressively from government to the students and their families. So naturally, therefore, a middle ground has to be found. Some people have suggested cost sharing, and I remember back in around 1985 when ACHEA was first introduced in Jamaica on tertiary education, first for UWI and what was then the College of Arts, Science and Technology. And this cess has gradually moved to full-blown tuition fees. And whereas in times gone by, certainly during my time, when I was studying in Jamaica back in the 80s, undergraduate studies that is, students' loan was used not to pay tuition fees, but to cover living expenses, because tuition fees were not charged. And so, as a poor country boy coming to Kingston, the student's loan was the means by which you ensured that you had bus fare, lunch money, and things like that. But nowadays, as more and more loans are being used to pay tuition fees, there's a major gap in the funding for poorer students because they are not able to cope. And so we find that it affects the rates at which students are able to complete, because sometimes, as we find in some of the primary schools and other places, they stop 1 or 2 days for the week in order to be able to take care of themselves while studying. Others have asked for the use of performance-based funding. Now, basically, the problem that we are faced with is that, one, there's no second-guessing the importance of higher education to development of human capital, and therefore there's need to articulate how financing higher education can be done. And failing to invest in higher education would lead to decline in the training of certain knowledge-based competencies that are needed to move the country forward. So the purpose of the study we embarked on was to synthesize the literature in order to determine strategies used for financing higher education in different countries of the world. The study is also designed to determine if these strategies could be applied by university administrators here in Jamaica and in the region. So the overarching research question was, given the financial challenge facing higher education sector in developing countries, how can university administrators increase enrollment, maintain costs, and yet offer quality programs? This was broken down into a number of questions. Firstly, to what extent has the financial challenge facing universities affected them in fulfilling their mandate? 2, what are the different types of university financing? 3, what evidence-based strategies are used by institutions in other countries to increase enrollment, maintain costs, and offer quality programs? The significance of the study is that it will contribute to knowledge of the higher education landscape and the possibilities that are available, and fill a gap in the knowledge that is available in this area. And the study also is of great significance to university administrators who find challenges in meeting the various obligations that come with running a successful and viable higher education operation. The study looked at strategies for financing higher education, therefore other levels of education were not addressed. So we were not looking at primary and secondary and early childhood. A literature-based research review methodology was used in the study. We reviewed the literature from online databases such as EBSCO, Emerald, Educational Resources Information Center, ERIC, Academic Research Premier, and Sage Online, as well as search engines such as Google Scholar and Microsoft Academic. And of course, from keywords from various articles, we were able to locate secondary literature sources. Secondary sources included were blogs, books, journal articles, reports, newspaper articles. And inclusion criteria included a variety of studies, research as well as grey literature, such as documents from annual reports of institutions, white papers that are presented by government entities, and we consider the time frame within which the information was relevant. Exclusion criteria included papers that are not current or relevant to our topic. And basically what we did was to synthesize the literature and seek to categorize the information based on the research questions that we asked. And the themes that were generated were categorized and used to answer the research questions. The first question, to what extent has the financial challenge facing universities affected them with regards to fulfilling their mandate? Each university has its mandate, which ranges from advancing education and skills to research and innovation. At the University of Technology, Jamaica, for example, our mandate, among other things, is teaching, research, and providing value-added services to society. Financial deficiency does affect achieving these mandates based on information gathered from in-house information sources, that is. In the reviews, 4 themes were identified as affecting institutions with regard to fulfilling their mandates. And these include: 1, low enrollment due to tuition inflation. And we found that this is a widespread challenge that we can identify with in the Caribbean region. For example, in sub-Saharan Africa, it was found that only 6% of the population had been enrolled in tertiary education. In an article by Mohamed Bai in 2011, speaking about massification of higher education, he spoke about the fact that the criteria for assessing massification of higher education was different for developing countries as compared to developed countries. In developed countries, in terms of how much of the population accesses higher education, it is considered that 50% or more is what is considered as massification in terms of how much of the population is accessing education at the higher levels. But for developing countries, rather than the quantum of what the percentage is, what is looked at or used to measure them is the percentage increase. So, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, where you may have only 6% of the eligible cohort of students who can do higher education, only 6% achieving it. If from year to year there is 25% or more increase in that number, then that is considered very significant. Among the other themes we identified were rising costs, Johnstone 2004, declining completion rates, shift from grants to loans, and the impact on various income groups. And at the end of this presentation, I have a number of these reference sources so that you can do further, you can access further details on these findings. The second research question was, what are the different types of university financing? To answer this question, examples were drawn from different countries, including United States, Korea, Hungary, Denmark, Canada, India, Hong Kong, United Kingdom, and Uganda. And I'll just share with you some of what we found from the various places. In the United States, there are 2 groups that pay for higher education. Firstly, you have the taxpayer through public or government programs, and second, you have the private or non-governmental sector. Sources of revenue for public institutions were as follows. Tuition payments accounted for 19%. State governments paid 36%. Local government 4%. The federal government 11%. And other sources, private sources, such as alumni institutions, business and philanthropic foundations, 4%, endowment or trust funds, 4%, and sales and services from hostel payment and cafeterias, 22%. Well, of course, in terms of earning from rental of facilities for boarding and lodging and food bought by students and so on, that will naturally be affected by the income levels of the household supporting those students. And that is one of the challenges that highlight a difference between the developed countries and the developing countries. In Korea, 84% of the total expenditures for higher education come from private payments and only 6% from the public sector. Similar observation was described in the Funding Challenge for Universities report published in Korea, where it is stated that higher education in the Republic of Korea relies heavily, that's South Korea, relies heavily on personal funding, placing much of the burden on families and students. Student loans cover relatively a small proportion of the students' higher education costs. And it is stated that for families, to fund their children's education, they start saving from a very young age. This is because they contribute about 52% of the higher education cost. Of course, when we are speaking about a country that has a certain GDP, then it is not very difficult to see how the costs can be borne by simply savings in terms of the greater portion of the costs, savings from families who are able to afford it, if the bulk of the population is earning at a level that is above what is required for higher education. There are 7 national student loan schemes in the Republic of Korea for financing disadvantaged students. As a result, there's a high demand for education in Korea. Therefore, private support for higher education is very high. In Hungary, there is a national student loan scheme which uses the principles of universal access. And family support account for 25%. Individual earnings account for 33%. The student loan scheme is funded through the issuance of bonds on the capital markets, and this was published in a document I referenced earlier. In Denmark, 0.5% of the expenditure for higher education come from the private sector, and 99.5% from the public sector. In fact, even one university in the Caribbean that I visited just last year, up to 4 years ago, they were financing 99.5% of the costs to run that institution. But as economic conditions change, that also has had to be changing. In Uganda, in order to ensure equitable access to higher education in Uganda and to address funding of university education, the government set up a loan scheme. Now, just to compare the fee setting in the United States, Canada, Hong Kong, Chile, Korea, and the United Kingdom, we find that in the United States, Canada, and India, tuition levels are set at the state or provincial levels. In Hong Kong and the United Kingdom, the central government sets the tuition fees. In Chile and South Korea, individual institutions are authorized to set their fees, and that is pretty much what happens here in Jamaica and in a number of other Caribbean territories. Other types of funding include variable fees, charging different fees for different courses, and there's a strong urge to reduce tuition fees by policy directives, where it appears that leaving it to individual institutions causes a decline in the national enrollment. Another recommendation or another way that is observed is that funding comes from world-class research and innovation. And this tends to happen a lot in UK universities, where based on the research output, the funding is allocated based on that, and not so much based on student numbers or based on the particular courses that are offered. To our third question, what evidence-based strategies are used by other institutions outside of this region to increase enrollment, maintain costs, and offer quality programs. The findings include performance-based funding for teaching and research using a formula similar to what happens in Belgium, and this is more and more being practiced across Europe. Then we have increased access to online education and to ensure success of admitted students. We have more and more institutions are moving away from face-to-face, brick and mortar, to online education, because that provides a way to reach more people, not only from other countries who want to access the education that we provide, but also for those who are not able, even within the country or within the region, to access through the physical facilities because of the limitation in terms of how much facilities or how many facilities are available or how many persons the facilities can accommodate. And of course, efficiency measures are also tied to funding. Also, increased research and innovation output have been identified as one of the measures that can be used, because it has been found that successful innovation can generate funding, and many successful universities actually incubate businesses from the innovation that takes place from the research, and by providing seed funding for these businesses, and also funding comes not only in terms of concessional rates for having their businesses incubated, but also providing the technical expertise to incubate them in exchange for equity in these companies. And so when these companies become successful, then the institutions have a stake in them, and that provides a significant means of income for the institution. There's a suggestion of changing student loan systems to increase the graduate contributions. And one of the ways is to have more long-term loans rather than short-term loans. And of course, seeking cheaper approaches to certify vocational competencies. Just to summarize our main findings, there are various conclusions. There are various ways possible for funding higher education. Secondly, higher education must be a priority as economies are becoming more information-driven. Thirdly, lessons can be learned from other countries based on the approaches that they use. Fourthly, the final approach that is adopted by us in our various regions, in this region by our various countries and institutions, has to be a combination of strategies that have been adapted to our unique circumstances. Among the possible approaches are funding the institutions directly, funding the students directly, so that they can shop around, so that it would not necessarily give an advantage to private or public institutions, but whether courses that are available are in public or private institutions, the students, once funded, can make their selection. Thirdly, offering scholarships based on priority areas. Fourthly, support for a strong loan fund. And one of the ways, as we have seen in some places, is to have long-term loans that are paid back, low interest rates over a long period, similar to what is done for a mortgage. And of course, to encourage entrepreneurial activities, service in exchange for funding, MOUs with private sector partners, and in one case, we have found that some universities have gotten quite a bit of support from even listing of the university itself on the stock exchange. In fact, the University of Southampton floated a 40-year bond that earned them over 300 million pounds on the London stock, and they are listed on the London Stock Exchange. And some private institutions do this, but it is perhaps something that even public institutions might wish to consider. But when all is said and done, the right balance has to be struck. And therefore, the recommendations from our study is that a fee-setting policy should be considered so that it is not just left for public institutions to charge anything that they choose, but guided by policy. For example, in the federal universities in Nigeria, tuition fees are not charged. Similarly, in Eastern Europe, like Russia and other countries of the former Soviet Union, tuition fees are not required. While in countries like China, students are required to pay tuition fees. But whichever case it is, there's a policy that actually informs what is done. And finally, we can set up a task force to examine the different modes of funding higher education around the world and see what additional information we can garner as to the advantages and disadvantages. I refer you to a number of sources that we have used for this study, and these are available. We may have a few minutes, I believe, for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Giles. Without prompting, he was bang on time. We had about 30 minutes allocated for him, and you're very precise. So we have about 10 minutes where we're going to open the floor so that you can ask your appropriate questions. I must say it has been a very comprehensive survey, and the information is very appropriate, very timely. My institution, the University of the West Indies, is just coming out of, we're starting where you ended with the recommendation. We had a task force in place to look at seeing how we can find more sustainable ways of funding the academy. And the work isn't complete yet, but a lot of this information that you've shared this morning would be extremely useful. And I would be the first to ask for a full copy of the report.
Okay.
And I hope all my colleagues that can also partake and share it. A very, very, I think, again, comprehensive and edifying report. Please give Professor Giles a round of applause. So you start, there are mics on the floor, you identify yourself, your institutions, and Professor Giles will field the questions.
Okay, I'm Marjorie Bolero Horton from the University of the West Indies, Mona campus. Now, the Caribbean countries, the OECS countries at the moment, in terms of funding, they have a priority list. So the students who apply, they don't get scholarships unless they fall on the priority list of the government. So they have to apply, they have to say what, they have to take in their letters from the university, and when they are sending to say they are going to fund their students, it has to be related to the priority area or they won't get. Now, I refer back to our plenary speaker this morning who spoke about something to do with retention, and from a personal level, I had a nephew who came into UWI to do a program, and it was a practical program, one that I thought that was so good. It was one of the newer programs. He had to go to the community. He did practical, but he was not interested in that area. So his father spent 2 years just paying for him. However, he came back into another program which he's interested in out of our Western Jamaica campus, the Mona Western Jamaica campus. And he is fine, he is doing so much better. So what we see is that, although we're talking about funding and so on, the interest too for the students, or student, has to be there. Otherwise, they are going to drop out. And what I find, and maybe somebody should do a study, I've always thought about it, the highest dropouts, if we should check it, are among the males. The males. So many students, I do recruiting at the undergraduate level, and so many of them, you connect with them by going to the schools. And some of them, so many drop out, they don't come back for a while, they're not doing anything, not that they're not interested, but they just drop out based on the programs that they are doing. Sometimes the opportunity to switch is good. So when we're thinking about funding, and I think I always feel very angry when I think about the amount of money spent by governments and sometimes even parents, and students just drop out and go on. They don't even think. And another thing is that we have to get to the parents. A lot of the parents, they do not think at all about how they are going to fund their students' education. You refer to a model in, is it China or Korea, where from early the families start thinking about how they are going to pay, and they probably save. I know for Jamaica that many of our parents do not think, they just think that my child is to go to the university. They do not think how they are going to pay. So we also have to get that into the mix, that it is a partnership, not only with the university, but the families and the government. So that is one. So that's one of the things I just want to say today.
Yes. Thank you very much for your contribution. And one of the things that has to be considered is also the way in which boys learn, or as opposed to girls. And sometimes we have boys who are not fully engaged because their way of learning might be a bit different from the strategies that are being used, and they drop out. You know, there are some famous dropouts that have done very well. For example, you know, Steve Jobs, he mentioned that he had dropped out of Stanford University, Bill Gates, and others. But this is not the model that we would want to introduce to whether boys or girls. We have to try to, as you have rightly said, find ways to ensure that they do not drop out. And also, especially for households that are challenged, there has to be a meritorious basis for scholarships in terms of performance. So if universities find that there are students who are seeking entry, who are very good at certain things and they are excelling at it, whether they are rich or they are poor, there should be an opportunity for them to access the facility for furthering their studies in the area of their choice. So to support the point that the choice that the students make is not an unimportant factor in the equation, and that has to be considered also.
Good morning. Rudolph Swell, Michael University College. Thank you for the presentation, Professor. Any thoughts, though, on leveraging sports as a funding source in the Caribbean context?
That's a very important one, suggestion, and a matter to consider. Universities in the United States, we know, have done very well in funding themselves through sports. In fact, there are some institutions that will tell you that a very significant proportion of the funds that are available to support research and teaching actually comes from competitive sports. But this is within a context in which there's a culture of investment due to returns from sports. And this is one of the things that I think Caribbean institutions are yet to fully appreciate, that sponsors do not just donate money to sports. They want something in return, and usually what they want in return is promotion of their products or their services. And that comes based on a link with the number of viewers of the sport. So if there's a sport that is very popular, and when there's a competition, you have thousands of people coming to watch it, or it is televised, then a sponsor will gladly support that sport because they get advertising benefit from being associated with it, which translates itself into purchase of their products or their services. But many of our institutions tend to seek donations without any commensurate consideration of what is being given to the sponsor or the proposed donor in return for what they will spend. Because if they can find that, let us say, institutions, companies, they have an advertising budget. That is a given. Companies, no matter how successful they are on the market, they have an advertising budget. But if they find that that advertising budget, a portion of it, can be used in conjunction with an institution, then it becomes a win-win situation. And not only sports, but tourism. There are other areas that we can think of that if, as institutions, we can identify particular services that we can provide to whether public or private sector. So it's not only the private, but even various government ministries. There are things that they spend money for. And if we can identify ways in which we can partner with them, get some of the revenue, then it would be a win-win situation. Good morning.
Good morning. My name's Umar Zaman. I'm director at the University of Lincoln in England. This is a really timely presentation you've given us. The UK is going through one of the biggest changes in its funding in its history, I suppose, in terms of reform, in terms of the Auger review that's just come out from central government. We've got a wonderful little thing called Brexit happening, which is putting a kind of the brakes on everything within the United Kingdom at the moment. The challenge we've got as a university, with nearly 18,000 students, is that they're looking to reduce the funding from £9,000 a student to £7,500 a student. In the context of it, people might think, well, that's not going to make a big impact, but it does when your biggest overhead is staffing costs, and we're looking at whole-scale restructural reform if that happens. I just wanted to get your view on what you thought of that, because you mentioned the UK in terms of the research element. We've also got something being introduced called the Research Excellence Framework, which means that if you haven't got a large number of academics providing 3 or 4 star papers, your funding streams are also limited. So the funding challenges are huge for the UK, which means they're now going to be looking at tapping into the international student market, which means it's encroaching on a lot of people's spaces in this room. So I think the markets are it's going to get a lot more competitive and quite cutthroat. I just wanted to see your view on it, please.
Yes, thank you. Indeed, it is a trend internationally for reduction in funding to higher education institutions. And in the UK, where the funding is largely tied to research output, I think it is something that has to be looked at within the local context. But I believe going forward, private sector funding has to be a priority for higher education institutions. And private sector funding will largely come through solving private sector problems. And so having students do projects for private sector bodies and linking the curriculum to solving these problems is a way to engage the private sector. And once they see that they are able to benefit from the research that is done at the universities, to them, it is value for money, and they will be willing to continue funding. And so that is just one of the avenues that I see as a way of filling the gap that is created when funding decreases from the government sources.
I'm mindful of the fact that we have another session before the concurrent, but I'd like to exercise the chair's prerogative. There's one question that I think I must ask. In your recommendations, you cited the possibility of public listings, and you cited the University of Southampton. And I heard you said kind of something about, say, public institutions can do it too. The University of the West Indies is owned by 17 governments and is a chartered institution. How could an institution like university do a public listing?
Well, that's a good question. Well, in fact, there's a recent IPO, initial public offering, that was made by the government for the Wigton wind farm in Jamaica. And I think much will depend on the statutory framework within which the universities operate, and it might be necessary to go in that direction to actually make modifications to the statutory instruments if public listing is precluded. I know that institutions such as the University of West Indies and, well, generally the public institutions, they are chartered or has an act of parliament that prescribes how they can get funds. But most of those that I've looked at, they do not preclude private sector funding. And to that extent, listing on the stock exchange can be seen as simply another way of seeking private sector funding, except that it is widening the base of the private sector who will be contributing. Yeah.
Thanks again. Please join me again in showing our appreciation for a very wonderful start to our plenaries. I would like to invite Ms. Felicia Amanda Kwa to present Professor with a token of our appreciation.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Fiona Prasad Singh. I'm a senior solutions consultant with Ellucian. What that really means is I come out and drive our live demos of some of our solutions that you all own. You might be familiar with Ellucian, as we are the largest provider of higher education solutions in the world. We've been in the business about 50 years. If you use Banner, you probably know who Ellucian is. We have some colleagues that are here in the room, so please stop by our booth and say hello. But I've been with Ellucian almost 8 years. In the world of higher education, over 20. I was born and raised in Guyana and then moved to the States when I was 13. So Sam likes to have me come out so we can talk about the English Caribbean and some things around how our students are doing and what we see in the future. So that's really what we're going to be talking about. And I'm sharing the stage today with my colleague Emily from TouchNet.
Hi guys, so I'm Emily Bombardi. I'm with TouchNet. I pretty much handle everything with Latin America and Caribbean, which I really like and prefer. We're so much warmer. I am half Brazilian, half American, so it's a nice mix. Get to dabble in both worlds. I've been working in higher education Gosh, I think for almost the past 5 years now. I worked previously for the University of Central Florida, and now with TouchNet. And TouchNet has been in business for the past 30 years, and we're in the business of making higher education smarter. So what we do is we are the leading provider of any kind of campus commerce solution. So we are an Ellucian strategic partner. We were Partner of the Year last year, so I'm very proud of that. And we are the only partner that is 100% fully integrated to their solutions so that you can provide a student experience from start to finish that goes from before a student is an actual student, so a prospect, all the way through their life cycle, even afterwards, once they're alumni. So that is what we do. And today, we're here to talk to you about a theme that I think is also important. So here the theme today for ACHEA is a new times and new approach to higher education. And so I think that our presentation kind of fits in, into how you can let digital transformation help guide student success. So to begin, digital transformation, I think, has become kind of a buzzword or something, so we really just kind of wanted to frame the conversation. So EDUCAUSE last year in their annual conference, they had a session that was around digital transformation. And so for us, in a nutshell, it goes from cultural, a workforce, and a technological shift. So it's how can we make things flow, or the flow of information so we have agility in the institutions and we can make smarter business decisions to give really a new business model so that what we're doing and the investments we're making are going to be set not only for the students of today, but really set the framework for the future. And again, leading, so how can you have your the adoption of technology to lead to better student outcomes?
And student outcomes leads a lot when we think about student success, right? So when we think about student success, we think about things like retention and students actually doing well in those classes, and how many of our students that start our institution actually end up graduating as part of that, right? And I heard Marjorie mention a few minutes ago about the number of students that are stopping out or dropping out, right? And how do we use the information with retention to make sure that our students are staying engaged? Because we then want to make sure that we're keeping the numbers of our students that start same as the numbers of the students that are actually graduating, right? We don't want to keep losing our students, and we want to make sure that when we think about student success, we're thinking about that entire cycle. So it's making sure that our students are coming on campus, they're engaging, they're meeting their goals, but they're also prepared for what they're going to be doing out in the market after they graduate. So when we think about the combination of a digital transformation or modernization or using technology and that outcome of measuring student success, we're really thinking about being able to access things in the cloud in an integrated environment and really in a fashion that's mobile. So these are the three kind of themes that we're talking about today. So when we think about those three themes around that, we're going to start with another buzzword we hear a lot, right, around cloud. How do we get to the cloud? What does the cloud mean? It's up there somewhere, but cloud really means that you have access to your data anytime, anywhere, without having to be on a device on campus, right? And you're hearing this a lot. I'm sure you guys are hearing this as you move through the world of technology. We've had some of our colleagues here that are moving to the cloud. And the value of the cloud is really being able to be accessible or have your data accessible, and it's proof point in this case specifically with Interamericana in Puerto Rico, where after Hurricane Maria a few years ago, all of their, as you all know, right, Puerto Rico was pretty much inaccessible. And because Interamericana had made the move and they had their Ellucian solutions in the cloud, they were able to be operable in 17 days. And can you actually do that? And part of what we wanted to share is their story. So we're going to try to play this video so you can hear directly from Interamericana about their experience of moving to the cloud. So
we had the Hurricane Maria on the 20th of September. All Puerto Rico got hit by the hurricane, and it was a natural disaster. Puerto Rico didn't have telecommunication, didn't have water, and didn't have electricity. But we had 2 generators and we had a water tank. We also had analog lines of telephone that we were able to communicate with the people in the States. We are in the cloud, we're in Lucene Cloud. For us, that was very important because if we had the system on premise, it would be a different story. And we were up in 2 days and we were able to run the payroll for the employees. That was very important for our president because people were having tough times. And we opened in 17 days. And that was a record because all the other universities stayed 2 months, 3 months. Some of them didn't even open. We thought about the disaster plan when we moved to the cloud. If another university reached out to me and asked me what to do in case of emergency, I would let them know that to be in the cloud, to consider being in the cloud. That is very important because your system won't be interrupted by anything.
So when we hear that, it resonates, right? I saw some head nods and the ability to really pay our employees in the time when they need that cash. And to be able to do that was a big thing for Interamericana. And following that lead and that story, Ana Jimenez, who was not in the cloud, actually took that as part of their strategy, and they were able to move to the cloud. We at Lucene were getting them up in, you said 60 days, Sam?
6 months.
6 months. I can't listen, obviously. But 6 months, we were able to get them up and running in the cloud. So now they're also going to be able to access the data in case of an emergency like a hurricane. But as Emily is going to say, go ahead.
Yeah, it's not really, so this is one example where it's a reality that all of us face, especially here in this region, for how disaster plan, but it goes way beyond that. It's about the continuity of life. So things kept going, since all of the data for Interamericana was on the cloud, they kept operating business as usual. So like Josie mentioned, it was keeping their payroll going for their employees. They were backing up and running for their students in 17 days, but everything kept going business as usual. But clouds, again, isn't just about disaster relief. It's about having access to your financial data, having access to your student data, having access to any of the data points on your campus without having to be tied physically to the campus. So that brings us to our next point where we mentioned about being integrated. So right now we have, think of it on your campuses, so much data from your students, from any kind of, whether they're going to classes, but they live in different places. And so what if you could take all of that data that you have and really see, are there patterns, are there things that we can identify from that? So again, that's what being integrated means.
And how do we bring that data into one place, right? You all know you're working in silos a lot, right? In higher education, we tend to work a lot around departments. So with the Lucene Ethos platform or integration, what it does is it allows you to bring data points in from all those disparate solutions that you have everywhere, right? So it's bringing the data from different places, right? Recognizing that you are going to be using tools like TouchNet offers, or you might be using another tool from another vendor that's not an Lucene solution. You are going to be able to use that platform to really bring all that data to one place, giving you that integrated experience. And from a student experience or your experience, leveraging all of that data that you've brought into the solution into a place like the Lucene experience, giving your students or you the view of all of that data from everywhere in one place. So think about it this way. If you're an institution that uses Banner and uses DegreeWorks, right? So you're using Banner for your students to register and do all of that information, then they're using a tool like DegreeWorks to plan out their audit. A student might have to log into multiple places. If you're using a tool like a Lucene Experience, you can bring all of that disparate data into a view. So from a student experience, they're going to be able to click one place, see everything all in one place, right? Be able to also see things like their registration and register for classes all within that view, and also see other things that TouchNet might be able, for example, to point out.
Yeah, giving them the ability to self-service their account, whether that is checking on their class schedules, checking on their advisor, their degree progress, but even more than that, going on, into the modules for TouchNet, they're able to make their tuition payments without having to go to a cashier line. They're able to see their different balances on their accounts. So all of that for a student experience, again, it's all about using, technology adoption to better the student experience for optimal student outcomes. And that brings us to our third point, mobile. So how many of you guys, just to kind of break it up a little bit because I feel like I'm losing you guys, how many of you guys have a smartphone? Okay, it's what I thought. I don't think there's a single hand that was down in this room. So really what we're doing and what, our generation right now, and even more our students and our future students, everything is on their mobile. Everything's at the palm of their hands. The information is right there. So as part of this digital transformation, any kind of technology adoption, it has to have that mobile first mentality. Can I see it on my phone? Can I do it? Can I access it? Can I pay my bill now? Can I check my class schedule? What else do I need to finish to graduate? Everything that we're doing is mobile first. It's that ability to be able to self-service anytime, anywhere. And again, so some of this data, and again, this is already like 3 years old for this data's purpose. I was trying to find a new one, but even 2016, 96% of students had smartphones already. And again, that can only be closer to that 99% mark now. Wearable technologies, how many of you guys, I see a bunch of you guys out there with Apple Watches and other kind of wearable technologies. Android, so more people are searching the web on their phones than they are actually using a computer. That's a phenomenal shift. So all of that really sums up to that omni-channel experience that we're talking about, so that you can put a class in your shopping cart. So I want to take this class on your computer, and then go later on in the day, access it on your phone, continue building your schedule, paying for your bill, paying for your classes, everything continuing with one seamless, integrated experience.
And why is that important? Our students are actually asking for that experience, right? How many of your students are accessing all of their data on a smart device? Whether it's a phone or an iPad or some sort of mobile technology. We did it today, right? How many of you flew from wherever you're coming from and had your boarding pass on your mobile device, right? We're using our phones every single day, and it's important because our students are asking for that experience. And it's proof in the fact that this survey tells us that a lot of our students, 85% of our students, are stopping out because they're not engaged. Right? And if we need to be more engaged with our students, we need to change our mindset and be able to engage with them on the devices and in the way that they're used to. I have a 13-year-old niece. She does everything on a little iPhone. I would be blind, I think, if I used my iPhone that way. But there's a survey besides this one that tells us that our Generation Z students are looking for everything in a mobile-friendly fashion. Somewhere I heard the statistics that we look at our phones, whether it's an iPhone or watch or whatever it is, about 200 times an hour. I mean, I believe it, right? And imagine the folks that do everything on there, what that looks like. So it's being able to give your students that experience that they're asking for on that device that they're looking for. Okay? And like Emily mentioned, it's giving them the ability to not just check emails or check their text messages. It's registering for classes. It's adding things to their shopping cart when they're looking for registration. It's, looking for payments and doing everything all on that one device, but being able with the omni experience, the omni-channel experience, to start it on one device and to continue that experience somewhere else. So I don't want to start doing something while I'm mobile and then have to start all over again when I get back to my desk or to a laptop, right? I want to be able to continue that experience.
And so I think the main question is, how do we make the change? So I think that this isn't necessarily a new topic. We're talking about this and we've been talking about this. So how do we really get there to make the change. You know, we all know that there are difficulties, you know, like we're constricted by budgets, by departmental approvals and fiscal years and all of that. And for this, really, you know, taking out the head trash is, if we think from the first mountain, you know, little hill that we see as a mountain, then that's the first point, you know, where we'll get stuck. So I think that the starting point needs to see, where do we need to be? We know that this is happening. We know the students are asking for it. We know that this will directly influence our student outcomes, those graduation rates, and, you know, by having an amazing student experience. So how do we get there? And a great example of that is with COSAT. So COSAT, about 5 years ago now, they realized they had a problem. So they came up to a challenge, and they have an amazing reputation for the quality of their education, but they realized that their homegrown IT solutions weren't meeting the expectations of their students. And how could they keep pace with that? And how could they set them up so that they were actually graduating students that were work ready, but not just, you know, for Trinidad and Tobago, but for the world, to be ready to compete in this global workforce? So they partnered with Ellucian and TouchNet to develop a strategic solutions roadmap that made sense and that tackled all of those obstacles in their sense. They put their solutions in a timeline, and so that they could maximize their resources and make a better business case for implementing that. What is the term that we were using, that you can't eat the...
Oh, you can't eat the elephant all at one time. You eat it piece by piece, right?
Yeah.
There's a joke that says, how do you eat an elephant? A bite at a time, right?
Exactly. So and that's exactly what they did. And so right now, they have banner solution. They're using the TouchNet platforms for all of their payments. And better than yet, so just now on Mother's Day, so they do an annual 5K race. I don't know if any of you guys out there from Trinidad and Tobago ran this race or not, but they actually used our e-commerce platform, our marketplace, and they used it to allow people in the general community to sign up for the race. So that was a way for them to bring in the general public into some of the experiences that their students already have. And they launched it as soon as they made it available. 50% of the registrants signed up online and paid for the registration. So you can already imagine what that release and that workload was. And the fact, better than that, is that people are hungry for this. If you make it available, they need it. I see a lot of people nodding their heads. Exactly, they need it. We need it. And this is, again, how digital contributes to better outcomes, and summarizes into their experience needs to match their expectations to keep engagement up. And what is engagement? Engagement is a direct result to student outcomes. And having that mobile experience. So walking in today, I don't know if you guys even remember at this point when you first walked into this room, but all of you guys have something on your, here, your badge, that you swiped in to, guess what, a mobile device. So that check-in this is not only for your badge, for your ID, but it's, we're able to identify where you are in these sessions. It gives us so many metrics. And right now, if you can use this as just one example of what happens on your campus, right now students are interacting with so many different parts in your campus, whether that is going to classes or buying something. All of these different individual touch points happen in their own system. They happen in that own department. There's no communication between them. So one of the solutions that we are here to talk about too is the Ellucian One Card VIP. So it brings everything into one platform. And so you have the analytics of that with everything from one card. And when we mention one card, and although you have a physical card here, the same thing you have on the app as a virtual representation of your card. So you're able to bring all of that into one centralized place. So it is not just an ID card. It's not just a checking in. It's not just, it is everything. You can use this to pay for things if you load up money in your account. You can use this to have checking into classes for attendance. It essentially is everything, brings all of your data together in one point.
Yep. And then being able to use that data to figure out where your students are stopping out, right? Because if we're waiting until a student's actually not enrolled at our institution anymore, it's too late. But if we can use the data from one card and from Banner and from everywhere else, right, in one place in an analytics form to figure out how we can drive the assistance that they need, that's vital, right? It's important for us to know beforehand so we can be more proactive with our outreach. But it's being able to use all of that data in an intelligent way. It's not having you run reports from here and here and here and here and then manually combine them. It's using that data in one place to then figure out with, for instance, your dining services. Are your students eating on campus at a certain time? Maybe we need to staff that better, right? Or it's what classes are they planning to take, because they've planned it out with a tool like DegreeWorks, so we know what they're planning to take in the future, so we can figure out what that schedule is going to look like. Are they taking classes more between the 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. session and not that 7 a.m. class? I am not an early riser. 7 a.m. doesn't work for me, right? But we can figure that out with the data and using the tools that you have to help drive those decisions. And giving you the tools to do that means that you have more control in what you do as an institution, right?
Yep, so essentially gathering all of that data from all of these different points and things on campus, from parking to dining to paying for their tuition, to make, again, I said in this in the beginning, we're here to make higher ed smarter. You know, you guys are there to make your students smarter, we're here to make you guys smarter, using all of these data points together to help so that you're using your dollars or your money more effectively, but again, everything leading out better to better student experience, better student outcome.
Right.
And again, this is just one example of how a seamless experience, from them it is. It's easy for them to access from their Banner student service, from all of their records, to paying their bill, to the money, the funds that are on their one card account.
To ultimately creating that experience of everything in one place, right? I don't know if you guys hear this a lot, but we hear it a lot in the US, and I had it as a student where I was logging in here and logging in there and having to go here and having to enter 12 different login information. It was almost like I didn't exist, from the admissions office to the registrar's office to the library tool, right? It's being able to give them one place where they can see it. So it's using technology and adapting that technology to really drive your student experience to help improve your student outcomes.
So it goes from being, having all the data quite literally in silos, from your financial data to your ID cards to from your student information system to everything, and moving towards what we are setting here to do. We are setting here to use technology to connect the people with the experiences. And so with that, we're able to give them a holistic view and give you a holistic view in terms on the administrative side, and give your students a better holistic experience on campus, and using that to improve your student outcomes.
And with that, we'll open up the floor if you all have any questions for us. If not, I will be here. Emily, Sam, Chris, Sandra, Mara, and some Gustavo and Gabriel are in the back as well.
And Dave there too.
And Dave. So stop by and say hi to any of us at any time too. I see a question.
Yep.
Yes, please.
Thank you so much. Felicia Amankwa, KNUST, or Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, Ghana. Very interesting presentation. I'm really chuffed about it. We have a similar system of a multi-purpose card for our students, but we haven't been able to trace their movements as yet. But it's a single card which gives them access to the various places. It's just a quick question. I'm just concerned about using a similar system on staff to trace their movements. I don't know. It could be something for the future. It's not like I have something to hide, but it's something that concerns me as a member of staff.
Yeah.
And so my question quickly is there an institution that's doing that already? Can you enlighten us, please? Thank you.
Yeah. So all of the people on campus essentially can be issued an ID. You know, so I've worked, like I said before, at a different institution, and you can use the card to track to open doors. So if you're going to get into the business office and you want to make sure that only the people that are allowed to open the door into the business office, well, that's exactly used for personnel, for staff to have their own one card, whether it's here or on your phone, to be able to use that and to get into the business office. You don't want students to get in. You don't want people from other departments that don't need to be in that business office. So you can use that for everybody, for all of your entire database, whether they're students or employees. You can track them, and you can figure out the way or the tools that you want to put to use for that solution. But it's definitely one solution, one card that can keep track of all of that for the right purposes. It's for campus security, for access points, you can, dining plans, everything. Oh, I think that mic's off.
Oh, yes. Hello, good morning. Thanks for this presentation. I'm glad that you're doing this presentation to a room full of administrators, because I am IT. And whenever IT tries to talk about these kinds of things, we are usually accused of liking all the toys and all the bells and whistles. And the plenary earlier spoke to the issue of financing higher ed. And so the only way that these things can actually be brought to the organization is if the administrators can make a business case for it. So I just wanted to make that plug that the administrators sitting in this room, if they find value to these things, they need to go to their heads and in their organizations and make the case for these things, because we as IT cannot make the case for you. Thank you.
And I think part of that too, Sam, is it's not just figuring out the case for it. It's you might actually, as part of your strategy, realize that you are using tools that are repeating themselves and paying for things that you don't need to keep paying for as you look to a more integrated solution. So in the long run, you might actually end up saving some cost there as well.
Right, and these solutions help to improve business processes, right? So we have to look at it from that perspective versus just technology. It does enable people to be more productive, thereby actually improving on your finances, right? Because if you have someone who's spending a lot of hours doing mundane tasks, when you can improve how they do their work and they can do it in a shorter duration, then they can be repurposed to take on additional work. Again, to focus on students and student outcomes. I think one of the key takeaways from this presentation is analytics. There's so much data that we have stored at our universities, and we spoke about the different silos. Each department operates in their own buckets. We're delivering the tools that will unlock the potential for doing what we're trying to do in Ghana, which is how do we know that the staff is being used optimally, right? So if we're able to figure out what the students really need, which courses, which programs are more essential, which ones are working the best, right? Then we actually can provide the right fundings towards the programs that works best and look at the ones that are not performing as well and take a second look and see what do we need to do to make them better, and if they're not needed for the market to produce the students who need to be effective for what the market desires today and tomorrow, then we need to get rid of that program. Universities have to become more efficient and more effective at what they do. The traditional model is going to die relatively quickly. Some of us, because we're bigger universities, bigger purses, we can continue to sit by and do what we've been accustomed to doing, business as usual. We have the advantage of being local. What is happening in our region is the international players are coming in and they're taking our students. And they're coming in with these systems. They're coming in with the data. They're coming in with the analytics. They're coming in very sharp. they're going to be recruiting your students, and they're going to take them, they're going to graduate them, and they're going to produce a degree for them that is internationally recognized. So if we think we can sit and do business as usual, and we're going to continue to survive as institutions in the next 3, 4, 5 years, it's not going to happen. You have to become more effective at supporting your students. We have to look at the market. What is the desire? What are the needs of the market? How does it align with the needs of the country? How does it align with the needs of the region? Are we prepping students to be effective for what the market desires, so that when that student makes the investment to go to university and study, investment in funding, investment in their time, when they graduate, are we transitioning that student from one economic position to the next position where they can actually accelerate and change their background from here to here and be able to be producing for their families down the road? We have a purpose. Lucian understands that, along with our friends at TouchNet, which is the reason why we continually look for strong partnerships, strategic partnerships. It's not just with our partners at TouchNet, but also the institutions. We have references here with COSTAD. We have references with Interamericana, Ana Jimenez. They're all strategic partners of Lucian. We're working with the University of Bahamas. I am wearing very proudly their logo, right? Because we're partnering with them also, and we're developing them to be a strategic partner. We recognize these institutions because of the work that they're doing in their respective territories, because ultimately it strengthens our position in this region, because we know we have very capable students who can compete internationally. However, we are the stewards. We are the ones that must produce the right programs to ensure that the students that we're graduating are students who are going to be able to compete not only locally, but internationally with every other student that is graduating from around the world. So thank you for your time. If there's more questions, we certainly will answer them.
More of a comment than a question. You touched on it now. I was gonna bring together the issue that was raised earlier, that the funding issues affecting the UK, and the fact that higher education is not just a social good provided by not-for-profits anymore, but is actually a business. And that the level of competition that we're expected to see in the region, one of the only strategic moves that I believe will make us competitive is if we invest here, because the higher education institutions that are doing very well are using the analytics to determine we're not just collecting demographic information and grades anymore, but how are students using the facilities, like you said, what time, what day. I've read where a university used the Wi-Fi access to track where students are at different points in time, including who are commuting, and found that the library was not being used, but a lounge that had a certain setup that appeals to persons in Generation Z. That's where they are doing their assignments. The university was able to intercept and send text message reminders to say, you're missing Math 101. This is where you needed to be. Or they're looking at some of the demographics for adult learners. Maybe do students within a particular age range perform better in this modality versus another? So I am just endorsing the fact that if we are really going to be competitive in the future, we will have to utilize the data that we have in a way that's more meaningful. So it will have to be integrated. So you can just recruit me for the TouchNet team.
Thank you for that comment. You really don't have a choice, because what's happening is across the territories, the ministries are saying, hey, universities, you need to go out and begin to fund yourselves. We can't continue to just give you dollars and not know. For every dollar we invest, right? And as a university, if you want to get more funding from the ministries, you should help them to understand what happens with that dollar. If they give you $1, what is the output of that dollar? Are they getting back 50 cents? Are they getting back exactly $1 that they put in? Or are they getting back $1.25? Because when you graduate that student, the value of that student should be greater than $1. If you're able to do that, then you know you have the right program at the university. And those are the things you need to measure. And the data is there. We're just not effectively leveraging it to let us know which programs are the best, which ones need some investment, which ones we need to close down and focus more attention on so that the students that we're graduating are ready to compete in this international space.
And so just to wrap this up, we understand this is a much bigger conversation and that roadmap is going to look differently for each one of your institutions. So just to go back to what Fiona had said earlier, we are here today and we'll be here throughout the event. We have our booths here. Please come visit us. We would love to take this conversation further and really find a way to develop a solution that makes sense for you. So thank you so much for your time, for sticking with us prior to lunch. And there's another panel coming up next. And so again, please come find us and we'll sit and chat. So thank you.
Thank you.